Hello class. Okay, this is the production possibilities curve with trade. My assumption is that all of you have seen production possibilities curves before, but probably not how they relate to trade. So I thought this would be a good time to do that. So here is the production possibilities curve you've probably seen in at least one other class. We are of course constrained by our factors of production. You may remember they're listed as land, labor, capital equipment, and entrepreneurs. This list comes to us from a long time ago. We still use the word land, but actually in modern times we mean really natural resources. That is the topsoil on the land for farming, but the minerals under the land, the weather on top of the land, whether it rains or not, how much sun there is, how hard the wind blows, how hot or cold it is. All that stuff is lumped under land. Capital equipment is the other one that's a little bit tricky because in your accounting and finance classes, capital probably referred to money, but in economics it refers to tools, machines, factories. We call it capital equipment. Anyway, so here's the factors of production and the production possibilities curve that you've seen before. Then you mix all that stuff together with whatever our technology is, and that gives us our constraint. So a good definition of the production possibilities curve is all the combinations of good A and good B that we can produce given our limited factors of production and our technology. So we could produce here or here or here or really anywhere along the production possibilities curve. Any point on the inside of the production possibilities curve would represent a combination of good A and good B that is insufficient to utilize all of our resources. For example, you could produce here, but you would have resources left over if you wanted to get all the way up to here and have more good B without sacrificing any good A. Of course, out here is beyond our ability of our factors of production and our technologies, beyond our ability to get out here. So we can consume this amount of good A that's represented by this point, or this amount of good B that's represented by this point because it passes through there, but we can't at the same time produce the combination of good A and good B described by this point. Okay, so that's the production possibilities curve review. Now from there, let's talk about preferences. Suppose the people in this country like about twice as much good A as good B. The question then is, well, where would they locate? If they like twice as much good A as good B, they would locate somewhere along this line where this line has a slope of a 1/2 because, we like 2 A's for every B, twice as much A as B. So for every B you have, there'd be 2 A's. 2 B's would be 4 A's. 3 A's would be 6. 3 B's would be 6 A's, and so forth. So we can draw this ray from the origin with that slope of 1/2, and we would call that the preference line. This preference line, of course, is related to these particular preferences. If it turned out that the people in this country liked A and B equally, then the preference line would be about 45 degrees and it would pass through here. If it turned out that the people in this country liked, for example, 5 B's with every A, then the preference line would be really steep like this. It would have a slope of 5 because it would be 5 B's for 1 A, 10 B's for 2 A's, and so forth. But for these preferences that I've given here, this is the preference line. Now the next thing to think about, oh yeah, I'm sorry, I left this off. So given our constraints, given our production possibilities curve and our preferences, we would locate here and we would produce A1 units of good A and B1 units of good B, and that's the best we could do. Now what about out in the rest of the world? In the rest of the world we call that the terms of trade. That is, what's going on in the rest of the world in terms of how much we can trade A and B. How much good B can we get by trading good A, or how much good A can we get by trading good B? So let's make up something simple. Let's say that the terms of trade in this example are about 3 units of good A trade for every good B. 3 units of good A, trade for every unit of good B. Now, my assumption is that many of you have never seen the terms of trade illustrated this way, so I'm going to back up a minute. I'm going to erase all this. I'm just going to make some little marks here. Now let's talk about what's happening in the rest of the world. Suppose you had 1 unit of good B and you wanted to trade it for good A. Well, based on the terms of trade, that 1 unit of good B would trade for 3 units of good A. On the other hand, suppose you had 2 units of good B, you could trade it for 6 units of good A. Or if you had 3 units of good B, you could trade it for 9 units of good A. I hope you can see that all of these trade lines are consistent with these terms of trade, and they all have the slope of minus 1/3. So one thing to remember is the trade line has no particular location. It only has slope based on the terms of trade. I know it sounds a little weird, so I'm going to try one more time. Suppose you had at the same time 6 units of good A and 3 units of good B. That's what you started with. 6 of these and also 3 of those. That would put you out here someplace, right? 6 good A's and 3 units of good B, and there would be some trade line that passed through there that would be parallel to all of these others, because the trade line comes from the terms of trade. So maybe on some other problem I might set the terms of trade to be A and B trade equally, in which case the trade line would have a slope of -1. It would be, about 45 degrees but downward sloping. On the other hand, let's turn this around completely. What if 3 B's traded for 1 A? Then it would look like this. 1 A would trade for 3 B's. It would be really, really steep. 2 A's would trade for 6 B's, and so forth. I hope you can see that the terms of trade determine the slope of the trade line. These things are all trade lines. Alright, so now let's go back to our production possibilities curve. This is where I left you. Here's the production possibilities curve. Here's our preference line from before. Now let's put on the trade line that matches this. And what we would do is we would fit a trade line that reaches as far out on the production possibilities curve as possible. So that would be this trade line right here. It would have a slope of -1/3 just as before, and it would be tangent to the production possibilities curve there. We're going to call this point 2, where the trade line is tangent to the production possibilities curve. Now, under free trade, what would happen in this country is the production in this country would move to point 2. We would produce only A2 units of good A. Notice that we were producing way over here at A1 units. We would produce less good A, but we would take these resources and divert them into the production of good B. So it would produce way more good B way up here at B2. So one thing to realize from this is once we introduce trade, production of A is going to fall and production of B is going to rise. Now you might ask yourself, well, why should we do that? We don't even like A that much. What we like is good B. Remember from the preference line? I think I said that backwards. We don't even like good B that much. We like good A. Remember from the preference line, 2 units of good A are consumed with every unit of good B. Now we've got all this good B that we don't even like. What are we going to do with it? Well, what we will do is we will trade for what we really want. We'll take all this good B, load it on a boat, if you want to think about it that way, trade along this trade line till we get out here to point 3. We will consume, not produce now, but we will consume A3 units of good A and B3 units of good B. We can, with trade, consume outside our production possibilities curve. Notice that we haven't produced outside of our production possibilities curve. We're producing right here, fully utilizing our resources, but we've reorganized our resources to take advantage of the terms of trade. Now, if you study this thing long enough, you will realize that these things we're going to export. We're going to produce all this good B that we don't really want. We're going to load it on a boat and trade it for what we really want, which is good A. So we're going to export this much good B. That's the difference between what we produced after trade and what we consumed after trade. At the same time, down here, we're only going to produce this much good A, but we're going to consume way out here, so we must have imported all of this. Now I've erased the terms of trade, but wasn't it 3 to 1? So if this number up here is 100, just making that up now, if this number is 100, that is the amount we export, this thing over here would be 300 to be consistent with our terms of trade. Keep in mind now that even though consumers are better off, consumers without trade were back here at 0.1, now with trade are out here at 0.3, not everyone is equally well off. For example, those people who made a living in industry A, they are worse off, right? Because industry A production, when we introduced trade, fell from A1 back to A2. But at the same time, workers in industry B are better off because industry B production went from here at B1 up there to B2. And this is the reason that economists are almost unanimously in favor of free trade, because it's obvious that 0.3 is superior to 0.1. But in politics, there's a lot of contention about trade depending on who your constituents are. If you are, some representative from some area that has industry A in it, then you hate trade. This is exactly what happened in South Carolina in the 60s, 70s, and even in the 80s. We had, there was this guy, Fritz Hollings. He was a longtime senator from South Carolina, and he railed against trade all the time because we had in South Carolina textiles. We don't have hardly any textiles now, but back in the 60s, 70s, and maybe even in the early 80s, there were a lot of textiles, and now they're all gone. But at the same time, we've produced something else. So we have now all of these plants all across South Carolina that really represent the globalization of the South Carolina economy. All right, so this is the trade model, and this illustrates why economists think free trade is such a great idea. But I want to take a few moments and talk about the moral side of trade, the moral side. And I'm going to make 3 points. They're a little heavy-handed, but I hope you don't get too angry at me. I believe that individuals are made in the image of God, and as such, they should be free to flourish. That is, to make decisions for themselves, to try to make a better life for themselves and their families. We should all be able to do that. And I'm hard-pressed to find very many people who think that's not true. But even if you don't want to pursue trade this way as a theological issue, you could think of it this way: it's just a practical issue from the Constitution. That is, that we are all should be able to pursue life, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You could think of it that way. But another way to think about it is oftentimes in political speeches they talk about nations trading, like the United States trading with China or the United States trading with Canada. That's a really confusing, in my opinion, false way to think about what's going on. Nations don't trade. There is no person called Uncle Sam, and he doesn't trade with some crazy person in Canada who's wearing a maple leaf. No, nations don't trade. Individuals trade. So I might buy lumber that's produced in Canada, or I might buy shoes that are produced in Italy or whatever. Individuals trade, not nations. All right. So I've made this little illustration here. Here are 3 individuals. Now, would it be okay for this individual to trade with that one? And I think most people, if you ask them, would say, well, yeah, why not? This person should have no say in whether these people can trade. And similar, these 2 people should be able to trade, and this one doesn't have a say in it. Or these 2 people can trade, and this one doesn't have a say in it. But what happens if there is a political boundary? Who should decide who can trade and who cannot? most people, when you put it to them this way, would argue that, well, we should all be free to trade with whoever we want. I should be able to decide what grocery store I go to, and so should you. If I want to drive to Latson, I live on Johns Island. If I want to drive to Ladson to go to the grocery store, it should be my business. Uh, we don't have any issues with people crossing county lines or municipality lines or even state lines to trade. But many people do have an issue if I cross a national boundary. So let's say that there's a boundary here, a political boundary, and now somehow this person lives on the other side of the boundary. This kind of trade is okay, but now it's not okay there. I would argue that this is not a good idea, and most economists, practically all economists, would argue the same way. So, free trade is consistent with the ideas of individual rights and individual liberty. It magnifies the gains from specialization, which comes down to us from Adam Smith. You know, Smith said nations become wealthy by specializing in trading, and the bigger the market, the more specialization can occur. And trade also creates political, economic, and cultural connections between trading partners. Once you have a business relationship with somebody, you come to understand them and their culture way better than if you don't. All right, so but what about loss of American jobs? You know, I've heard it many times, oh, trade causes a loss of manufacturing jobs. Not American jobs. The job rate or the unemployment rate is not related to how much trade we do. It's easy to see. You can just get the unemployment rate, which I showed you how to do a couple of weeks ago. You get the unemployment rate and regress it against international trade, and you will see there's no relationship between the unemployment rate and how much trade or trade deficit we have. But something certainly is going on because we're losing a lot of manufacturing jobs, and I've collected these really old photos. So these guys, and I think that's a woman back there, are building cars. We don't build cars this way anymore. We have machines and really robots to lay down these quarter panels and weld them all up. This woman is putting an ice splice in a rope, and I know this doesn't happen anymore. I haven't known how to do this since my old Boy Scout days, and I don't think I could do it now without Googling it on the internet. But way back in the day, all that stuff was done by hand. These guys are running printing presses, and none of this is done today. All of these jobs are lost to computers because now computers with laser-guided printers are printing documents. They're either printing the documents directly or the lasers are etching out metal type, which then runs in printing presses. But these jobs are all lost, right, to technology. This guy, you probably can't recognize what he's doing, but this guy here is a craftsman who has cut this curve from some drawings from a maritime architect. So a maritime architect draws out the curves of a hull one after another, and then this guy cut those curves out from the drawings, and now he's building a model that fits these curves. See how he's whittling it down so that this model of a big ship fits these curves that were drawn by the maritime architect. And then this model, my understanding of how they used to do it is this model is then taken out on the floor of the shipyard where the hull is welded up, and the welders would take like calipers, giant calipers, and measure these distances off of this model, and then they would try to weld up the hull that matched these proportions. Well, none of that's done nowadays. It's all done with AutoCAD, so this guy's lost his job. These people are making soap, and I'm sure there's a very fancy automated machine that makes soap. This guy, I recognize this job. I'm old enough to remember before there was retail ice all over the place. If you needed ice, if you were going to go fishing and you needed a cooler full of ice, you would go down to the local ice house, usually early in the morning. Some guy like this would drag a big 300-pound cake. This is a 300-pound cake of ice out onto a wooden floor, and then he would take his tongs and cut it up into smaller pieces, maybe 20 pounds each. Then he would drop it into a grinder that would make crushed ice. I used to love to go with my father to get this, and they would shovel it with a shovel into a giant paper bag, and you would take it home and hopefully get it into your cooler before it would start to melt. So this guy, his job is lost. It's all done automatically now. Anyway, so those jobs are all lost to technology, not to trade. You might be surprised to know that the number of manufacturing jobs worldwide is declining. Not just in the United States, but in China and everywhere. Where are those jobs going? Those jobs are going to machines. Going to machines. The pattern of job loss in manufacturing is very similar to the pattern of job loss in agriculture, which all of you are probably aware. Did you know that 100 years ago, the vast majority of workers in the United States worked on farms, but now I think it's less than 3%. In both manufacturing and agriculture, there's a pattern of a general rise in output. So we have more and more manufacturing in the United States, which probably some of you didn't know, but the number of jobs associated with manufacturing is falling, and it's been falling for quite a while. So this trend in agriculture started over 100 years ago, probably in the 1860s, 1870s, something like that. So here's what's happening to the number of jobs in agriculture. It's fallen almost to zero. Manufacturing started to fall in about 1950, and it's been slowly trending down since then, and these are all other jobs. It doesn't mean that the manufacturing jobs or the agriculture jobs were lost to trade. They were really lost to technological innovation. Okay, so what about trade deficits? Well, you might remember from a couple of weeks ago, we talked about this already. The current account deficit, here it is a mirror reflection of the capital account surplus. So it's not like we buy $100 worth of stuff from the rest of the world and they only buy $80 worth of stuff from us, and they take the $20 and toss it in the trash. That's not what happens. They invested in the United States, and those investment dollars, especially in South Carolina, have radically changed the South Carolina economy. All you have to do is drive along I-26 or I-85 between Atlanta and Charlotte to see how amazing it is, how the global economy has found a presence here in South Carolina. Then what about unfair trade? Well, this is kind of an odd term, unfair trade, and I hear this term about the level playing field. None of that stuff really rings true to me. One way to think about it is no trade is unfair because, two people voluntarily decide to trade. Or you could think about it that all trade is unfair because obviously somebody has an advantage in something and I want to buy from them, and I have an advantage in something else and they want to buy from me. There is a great parable about unfair trade that was written by a French economist in the 1800s. His name was Bastiat, and you can Google it. It's called The Petition of the Candlemakers. I don't know if I put that title here. Let's see. Yeah, here it is. If you just Google The Petition of the Candlemakers, of course now it's translated from French, so it's a little hard to read, but it's hysterical about these French candle makers who are all upset about unfair trade really from the sun, and they're lobbying the French government to force people to blot out their windows. Anyway, unfair trade. Okay, so that's it. There is the technical part of this lecture, that is the production possibilities curve in trade, and why it is that economists are almost unanimous that free trade is a good idea. And then there is this kind of heavy-handed part that I put at the end about the moral argument for trade, and I'm convinced, but maybe you are not. And once you get out of my class, if you want to contact me and tell me how that I'm mistaken, that protectionism is a moral position, I'd be more than happy to hear your argument. All right, everybody, that's it. Good luck.